Unividuals present The Worlds Within the Tree, read to you by Amici Atilt. The birth of the tree. The tree could still recall its first moments in this world, when it shot into being. It was born into darkness, but this world was as vibrant and rich as all the others, and over time it would come to know many worlds. The worlds of the skies, that of the waters, and that of the surface. In hindsight, the tree never learned as much about itself as this first period that it was forming, giving itself shape while leaning on and pushing itself out and away from its surroundings, but at the same time feeling like it bonded with it and learned the ways of the earth. It knew how to grow without having learnt it, and it worked its way upwards, also something it figured out innately. It was a struggle, pushing the dense earth aside with its newly formed limbs, green and fragile, but full of the drive that new life is blessed with. Eventually, its efforts were rewarded, for it felt the warmth of the surface as its first tender leaves pushed through the earth and looked upon the abundance of color that the newly discovered world had to offer. How long it had lived in darkness, or how long it had lain in wait, it did not know. But the tree felt joy immeasurable to be a part of this new world. Yet again, it felt a strong connection to this newly discovered plane, and though it was but a newcomer, whatever there was already, embraced it like it had always been part of it. While the tree was spreading its roots deep, far and wide, water started coming from the west, and in time grew into a powerful river that made its surroundings flourish, including the tree. As it realized its apparently endless potential for growth, it observed that life was being created all around it, but by what or how it happened, it did not know. Some were akin to itself, but others were nothing like it in shape and size, yet the tree sensed they were all driven by the same life force that made it push out of the world of the earth below into this one. The tree was now able to see both worlds develop as the river gave it all the sustenance it could ever desire. This made it grow so tall and so large that eventually it came to know a new world, a world that had its own language. The skies. Because the tree had never heard of time, the concept never entered into its considerations, and while it was growing, it focused on and often marveled at its own development. Now, however, it felt its rapid growth slow down, and it had time to look around, contemplate what it could perhaps mean to others. It noticed that the life around it had exploded in both numbers and variety, but now that it could see beyond itself, it could see that there was no peace in its surroundings. Life had trouble finding a harmonious way to live with itself, even though the environment left little to be desired. The tree did what it had actually never done before, and it listened. It spoke all the languages now. Because of the river, it had even picked up the language of the waters. And it heard all the grievances around it, and longed that these flow down the rivers that the tree contained. The fruit. The moment the tree started to listen, there the disgruntled minutiae of the lives around it flooded in. Life on the surface lamented that life elsewhere didn't show that they knew the weight of existence. Life in the water had observed that life elsewhere went about its business with a noticeable lack of depth. Then, life in the skies weighed in with the notion that life elsewhere put too much stock into its own opinions and was stuck in its ways. Lastly, life under the surface was saddened that life elsewhere seemed to have little interest in burrowing into its roots. And so, the tree heard the cries of life and learned from all forms of it. The tree entered into a process that perhaps was always the how to its why. After taking in all the languages and the sentiments that were expressed through them, it developed a fruit that had meant to unite the worlds around it, to understand each other, and to live in harmony. The world that was ever evolving and developing around the tree itself, for it seemed that the tree had become the center of all that was. The fruit was large and round, and it glowed softly in hues of amber when it was ready to be eaten. And once a creature ate one of these fruits in its entirety, understanding would follow it for all its days. Not only was the fruit imbued with the 4 languages, but the tree also added its own wisdom, strength, and patience to it, for it had grown large in every respect since it humbly pushed its way out to the surface. This added a sweetness that no creature could then resist. The fruit contained a new language within it, one language that all would understand, and though they would never be without small squabbles, the fruit brought a harmony to life that had not been there before. And from that moment on, the tree bore fruit enough for all life to gorge on, and all knew peace. The Outsiders. The time of peace lasted so long that creatures came and creatures went until only the tree knew of the times that harmony was not among the living. It was then that new creatures appeared. Obviously this was in itself not strange, but the creatures themselves seemed to be. They walked upright, something only very few creatures had done, and they seemed to speak a language that was completely their own. None of the creatures seemed to understand the new one, even though it clearly shared certain traits with every form of life, from the water to the surface and from the earth to the skies. With the arrival of the new creatures, the harmony was broken. The new creatures displayed behavior that had not been seen for the longest time. They seemed confused, but instead of looking inward for the solution, they lashed out at their extended family of living beings. They tried to learn how to function in the world without ever actually learning its ways. All the creatures tried to tell the newcomers about the fruit of the tree. That would be the salvation of everyone. For if they just ate one piece, they would know harmony, but to no avail. The beings didn't understand, nor did they try to learn any of the languages that now all of life around them did speak. The tree witnessed its carefully united world fall apart piece by piece, and for the first time it felt powerless to stop it. It still grew the rich amber-colored fruit for every new creature that was born, so they would know themselves and others. But now, all of life also received the knowledge of the creatures that came to be known as the Outsiders. When life had adjusted to the presence of the Outsiders as well as it could have, there was one creature that made one last effort to have the Outsiders be part of the harmony of life. The creature was a unique form of life with a long, slender body and eyes that seemed to almost emit light instead of permitting it. The creature was by nature an observer, and often did so from the branches of the tree. Taking advantage of this trait, it came to have a very basic understanding of the language the Outsiders were speaking among themselves. Not only that, but it also seemed to understand better than any the motivations that drove them. The attempt. One day, one of the Outsiders was walking past the tree when the long, slender creature took its chance to seduce the disruptor to eat the fruit. "Fellow living, lend me your ear," the slender creature spoke slyly. The Outsider was startled to have something other than their own speak their language, but listened all the same. "What do you want, creature?" the Outsider spoke. The slender creature felt the curiosity in the air, but knew that it had to sell the idea. "Witness the fruit in this tree, upright one. Once you eat it, you will know good from evil," spoke the creature while resting on one of the tree's smaller branches. The slender creature discovered the power of these words in the language of the Outsiders, while observing, and while it broadly understood what it must mean, there were no such words in any of the other languages. The tree saw that the slender creature had intrigued the outsider, and it seemed to be in thought for a while. Then the outsider ran away, to the surprise of both the tree and the slender one. But it was not long when the outsider returned with the other of its kind. The outsider that spoke to the slender creature motioned to the fruit on the tree, and the slender one heard it tell its fellow the same message the slender creature conveyed moments ago. The fellow outsider looked frightened at the one that spoke, pointing at the tree in reverence and fear. The slender creature seemed to hear that their discussion revolved around some sort of belief that the tree's fruit was not for them. Eventually, the outsiders seemed to be resolved, and one of the outsiders asked the slender creature for confirmation of its promise that they would know good and evil. The creature nodded, and the tree felt a piece of fruit being plucked from one of its lower branches and hoped this would finally be the moment that harmony would forever conquer its world and everything in it. But when the two shared a bite, their body language changed entirely, and they suddenly threw the fruit away from them. The tree saw its creation disappear in the surrounding foliage, a faint amber glow still emanating from it. The two outsiders ran away and started covering themselves with leaves while the slender creature called after them. After this, the tree never saw the outsiders again, and in its immediate surroundings, harmony returned. The tale of the outsiders and the fruit was forgotten by everyone, but of course the tree remembered, as it remembered everything. The Return. The tree heard the stories from the skies and the surface creatures, and eventually it started to feel and see the activity itself. It saw the horizons change, it felt the energy in the air, and the earth become lesser and lesser. The creatures around it dwindled, and the tree's lesser brothers died by the handful. But when the outsiders returned and saw the tree once again, now standing among the desolation, they didn't seem to be able to exert their cruelty and brazenness onto the great tree. They still seemed to cower in its presence. The tree sensed the time had come. The outsiders were outsiders no more. They made the others and the tree itself an outsider. But they seemed to remember the tree, and while they eyed it with reverence, the tree gathered strength and made the fruit on its branches glow like they had never done before. This did what the slender creature only partially accomplished. Some of the outsiders ate the fruit and seemed to see everything around them in a whole new way, eyes shining bright. Just when the tree thought that it had saved what was left of the peaceful world it was born into, and the outsiders that ate the fruit were grasping the profound change they underwent, a flash was seen on the horizon. It created a wave that seemed to eat everything in its way, and the tree saw it approaching before everything was veiled in white. The tree had no idea what happened, though the sudden silence suggested that life around it and far beyond it had disappeared. Under the surface, though, it still felt the stirrings like it always had. It knew life would return. That's what it did after all. The tree carried within a collective memory, and one day it would get to tell its story once again to whomever would be listening. The tree would be waiting. Thank you for listening to The Worlds Within the Tree by the Unividuals. Music and production by Sly Maceo.